Hi, welcome to Monster Transmission. You're in Curt's Corner. Today we're going to go over how to install a superior reprogramming kit in a Ford C6 transmission. Okay, the next valve in the valve body is a line pressure or coast valve. That valve we're not doing anything with. I'm just going to pull it out to make sure that it's free and clear. Yep. There's no spring, there's no check ball. It's just this valve. And the instructions show you the order to place it back in the casting. The next two valve trains is the 1-2 shift valve and a 2-3 shift valve train. And the shift kit doesn't involve installing any springs or modifications to either one of these valve trains. But I've taken them out, cleaned the bore, ensured that the valves are free, and they have springs behind them. So I make sure that when you compress the spring, that the valves are moving freely. So the 1-2 and the 2-3 shift valve train is good. The next valve train is the 3-2 valve train. It has a spring. I've taken that out, cleaned the bore, installed the valves and the spring back in place. And the next valve we're actually going to work on is we're going to work on the accumulator, which is this valve train here. We're going to take the accumulator valve train that has springs on top of the actual valve. There's two springs, an outer and inner spring, and actually has a sleeve. I'm going to walk this valve out, and this is the sleeve, the accumulator sleeve. So these two valves, or springs, fit right inside this valve. So we're going to be replacing the larger spring here with the one that says in instructions, step 2. It says replace the spring with a white spring. So here's a white spring. This will be replaced. So that will fit right inside this other spring, just like it did before. And then you reinstall, has like a little cup area here. That will actually fit facing upward. So you reinstall the valve, you reinstall the springs, like so. And now we're going to change the actual modulator valve and spring. So the valve stays the same. Again, it has a little cup plug area. We're going to discard the original spring and install the new yellow spring in that same area. And now this valve will slide right back into the bore like so. So there's all the valve train reinstalled. This plate again has oil channels in it and it'll only fit one way. So we'll put some pressure, hold this plate down, and we'll start a couple of the screws. So there's one screw that's longer. That longer screw goes here at the top near the middle of the plate. So this is the long screw, and all the balance of the screws are the same height. Then we're going to tighten them from the center out by hand, and then we're going to torque them down 25 inch-pounds. Okay, now we have the valve body facing the same direction as the instructions, and it shows you where the check ball locations are on here. And on really heavy duty applications, there's an additional thing that you can do on these valve bodies is if you want for like extreme heavy duty towing or racing, then you would actually drill an oil passage through it. On step number 6, a 1/16 hole will be drilled right here in this passage. Again, that's only an extreme towing or heavy duty application. We drill that hole. So this is just a street performance, so we will not be drilling that hole. In the kit also comes two different size drill bits. There's a 1/8 and a 7/16 drill bit. The 1/8 is the larger drill bit of the two that come in the kit, and it shows you on the shift plate, which you've cleaned up, where to drill a hole to modify the oil passes and oil flow to the transmission. So we're going to do that step next. Okay, the instructions, you turn the shift plate, this is the shift plate, in the same pattern as it's in the example, step number 7. It shows you where you're going to drill a hole, which is right here. You're going to open this oil feed hole. The shift kit says to drill at 1/8. So the larger drill bit is the 1/8. So it's this hole here on the shift plate. So now that oil pass has been opened up. And that's the only place that we're going to drill this plate. There's no other holes to drill on this shift plate. And also, what does not come in the superior kit is the actual valve body gasket. So That you have to order separately, or if you're overhauling your transmission, it will come in the kit with the transmission. We're not going to reinstall the check balls and the spring assembly back into the valve body. So you follow the instructions. Again, we have the valve body lined up the same position as the diagram. So that way the locations of the check ball will be accurate. Check ball locations is here, and if it's 77 and newer, then there's an additional check ball location here, which is our application. So there's 2 check balls, okay? And then there's spring assemblies, okay? The one spring assembly with like a little shaft on the top that actually goes all the way up front here on the valve body, and the little cap spring goes on top. And then there's another spring assembly. So this is the throttle relief valve here. And this you have the spring assembly, slightly shorter than the other spring assembly. And to help us hold it there, we'll put a little trans gel, and a little check ball sets right there. And now what has to happen is this actual shift plate will line up and set down on there. So you have the shift plate lines up in this fashion. And the gasket that came in our kit sets here on top. And then you actually have your plate, which I've cleaned up, will set. And what you can do, there was the 4 screws. There's 2 in the center. You start them by hand. 3. And the longer screw goes here. And now we can invert the valve body over. And this taller, there's 2 bolts. The taller bolt will go here on the valve body, and the shorter bolt will go here on the valve body. And again, you start these by hand, you pull them down some, and then you have this plate, and the plate is unique because again it has an oil passage in it. That location goes here. This is your manual valve, and this is your detent valve here. The plate lines up in this fashion. You see it has an angle cut here. That's to clear the casting of the valve body down here. So it will fit in that direction. The regular bolt goes on the outside, and the other bolt that has a stud on the top, that's for your detent, goes closest to the detent valve. So now we have this other plate that goes here on the valve body with the bolt. You want to make sure that all the gasket is cleared all the holes around the plate, because your valve body bolts have to come through these holes, and make sure that they're all clear before you tighten the valve body assembly together. So now we're going to hand tighten it, and then we're going to torque it down to 25 inch-pounds. Flip it over, we'll tighten these 4 bolts up. So now we just need to install the gasket for the filter. We're installing a new filter. Again, all the bolts on the filter are the same, have the same head, and they're the same length. So start them all by hand first. Then there's other instructions in the shift reprogramming kit that refer to other items in the transmission. One is the servo. You're going to replace that spring, and also how to adjust your modulator. You have a vacuum modulator in most of these applications. You get all these screws tightened up. And in the instruction, it refers to other items or things to look for when you're rebuilding the transmission. One of them is on the servo assembly itself, which we have here. The early design pistons actually had an aluminum piston with 2 rubber seals that you would replace. The later models went with this bonded piston to where it's different size pistons depending on the number or letter that's casted into the side of the actual cover. There's A's, B, N's, O's, so there's different letters. And the shift kit reviews that, and you use different size servos. You have to get the correct one to fit the servo assembly. So you would discard the factory spring, and you're going to use the new red spring per the instructions will be replaced in the servo here. The other item they refer to in the instructions is the modulator. This is the vacuum modulator that goes on this transmission. The early ones actually screwed in. The later ones, all the late ones, are pushing. They have a bracket to hold this in. There's a little metal rod that goes into a vacuum piston, an actual piston in there. So when the vacuum pressure is applied, we'll move that and it'll tell command the transmission when to shift. So in the end, if you notice right inside, it looks like a Schrader valve like you have on your tire of your vehicle. There's one that has a straight slot. So this small straight slot screwdriver, you can adjust, turn it in or adjust it out. If you adjust it in, we'll make the transmission shift later. If you want the transmission to shift earlier automatically, then you would pull the screw out a couple of turns. So this is an adjustable modulator. This does come in our Monster in the Box kit, or we do sell just the modulator. So this goes over all the items that come in the Superior Reprogramming kit. So now we have our performance valve body ready to go into our F-250 truck. So we'll see how this thing shifts and performs in the next little bit when we install this back in the transmission. If you have any further questions on any of our kits or parts, feel free to call us here at Monster, 1-800-708-0087, and we'll talk to you then.